course, the breaking news of the moment is that Turkish fighter jet shot down a Russian aircraft near the Turkey-Syria border. Turkey is saying that Russia's warplane had violated Turkish airspace, and it ignored repeated warnings to get out of the airspace. I want to bring in Cato Institute Vice President of Foreign Policy Christopher Preble right now. Christopher, thanks very much for joining us. Explain the implications here. We know that basically Russia inserted itself from the beginning with its troops and air attacks above Syria. Now that one of their warplanes has been shot down by Turkey.
Right. I mean, this was always a risk. I think people who have been following this all along, this was one of our greatest concerns. Initially, you'll see Turkey and Russia disputing where that Russian plane was. Was it over Syrian airspace? Was it over Turkish airspace, as the Turks claim? But we have to remember, of course, that Turkey is a NATO ally. If the Russians retaliate against Turkey, what will be the NATO response, including the U.S. response?
Dagen, this is a really serious situation here. I mean,
correct.
If you've got these two pilots now unaccounted for. There are reports that one pilot is dead, another pilot was captured. They, of course, ejected themselves from the plane and landed on with their, what is it called?
Right. I want to ask Chris this. We talked about deconfliction. Is this reconfliction? Is there any way to know where this goes from here?
I think in a situation like this, it's almost impossible to know for certain. Again, both sides are going to claim, cite their technical information that the Russians are going to claim, and they already have, that the plane was over Syrian airspace. But I think the broader point is, you have a lot of people here in the United States talking about imposing a no-fly zone over Syria, not over Turkey, over Syria, and therefore these sorts of incidents, if we were actually to try to impose a no-fly zone over Syria, these types of incidents we would be talking about every day, because Russian airplanes are operating in the airspace over Syria. No one disputes that. And if we're going to impose a no-fly zone, then these sorts of incidents are likely to occur.
Chris, what do you think is most likely to happen next?
Well, Vladimir Putin is in the region. He's in Jordan, as I recall, and he's likely to talk about this, I would imagine, later today. Meanwhile, the Turks are obviously out with their version of the story, so I expect we'll be talking about it all day long. But as we've already said, it's going to be very difficult to determine definitively who's in the right. The greater concern, again, is what is Russia's recourse in terms of retaliation, if there is one, and then what will be the response of the United States and other NATO allies if Turkey is in fact attacked.
And Keith, yesterday we had Gary Kasparov on the show. Basically, he said what he has been continuing to say, and that is Russia wants to trade in conflict.
Right.
They need as much conflict as possible so that it looks like Putin is the big guy saving the world. Its economy is crashing. Do you agree with that, Chris, in terms of, because that opens up a can of worms for Putin. I mean, he could just take this anywhere he wants.
It does open up a can of worms for lots of people. Vladimir Putin has already had his nose bloodied in this conflict. Russian jetliner obviously downed by ISIS claiming responsibility. So the Russians are learning what it's like to play in the Middle East, a lesson that the United States has learned to its detriment over a many-year period. So the Russians chose to play in this space, and they're paying the price. But more seriously, this is already distracting attention somewhat from the ISIS attacks last week in Paris and the attack in Mali by apparently an Al-Qaeda affiliate. All along, the concern of actual fighting between U.S. and Russian or Russian and U.S. allies, that was always, in my mind, a greater concern, and lo and behold, that's what we're talking about today.
It's interesting because Russia, you could argue, there's an empathetic view you could have of Russia here. Basically, they're on the heels of joining the French, flying alongside them. Now they're shot down. I don't know if Putin, maybe he needs to trade in conflict, but he also has an opportunity here to look like he was hurt or harmed, or we should have some empathy for him.
But he was in airspace. He was in Turkey airspace. And apparently Turkey's saying that they told them several times to move.
I think there was a reasonable chance, and I still think there is a reasonable chance that Russia and France will collaborate to some extent against ISIS. There has always been a common interest there, but other French allies have been warning against that, and the Obama administration affirmed yesterday again that they would not coordinate with the Russians in fighting ISIS.
So what are we going to do then, Chris, in terms of fighting ISIS? Still be a marginal player?
I don't think we're a marginal player. We don't have troops on the ground. You have some people here in the United States calling for that, but there's still strong opposition to large numbers of U.S. troops on the ground. Again, the lessons of Iraq are still weighing very heavily on the minds of most Americans, and so I think we're likely to see continued airstrikes by the U.S., maybe even some ramping up. But I still think that given our experience in the Middle East over a 15-year period, there's going to be a great reluctance on the part of the Obama administration and most Americans to put tens of thousands of U.S. troops back into the ground there. And I think ultimately that's the right decision, that the United States does not need to be on the ground in that region fighting as we've been doing for so long.
So do you think the airstrikes are working then?
I think the airstrikes will certainly degrade ISIS's capability. At the end of the day, the fighting will have to be done on the ground, but it should be done by the forces on the ground who are most severely threatened by ISIS. That includes the Turks, includes the Kurds, and ultimately we would hope that the Iraqi government that we spent so much blood and treasure to put into power, they would ultimately get their act together and learn that their greatest threat is ISIS, not their own citizens.
All right, we will leave it there. Chris, good to have you on the program today. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Christopher Preble joining us there. Let's take